are beginning a new discourse. Are beginning. Oh, quiet. A new discourse. All right. We are beginning a new discourse from the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. As we've mentioned many times, the discourses are based on various different verses in the Torah, but rarely are they, say this gently, softly, rarely are they about the verse. In other words, the verse is almost just a way to get into the conversation, to discuss various different ideas in mystical thought. Ultimately, they always answer the questions that are posed on the verses. But it's Torah, we just celebrated the holiday of Shavuot, where we commemorated the revelation at Sinai. And Torah is really more than just a book of information and wisdom. It's actually a divine energy that transmits into the world. So there are just different channels, but it's all about the same end game of divine energy being transmitted into the world. And we are making every attempt to try to access that, to try to understand it, ultimately for the purpose of connecting with it, because we become enlivened as a result of it, literally and spiritually and figuratively. We become enlivened when we plug into the content there, because as we've discussed many times, and those of you that recently took the course, godliness is basically concealed right here. Whereas a friend of mine likes to say, godliness is hiding in plain sight. And our job is to peel away the layers, to connect with what's already there. So, all right. So with that in mind, we're going to begin this discourse. And we have no idea how long this discourse will take for us to study. So we're here it could take 3 weeks. It can take 6 months, but we'll keep moving through it. As always, everybody is invited to ask questions and to engage. So the discourse is based on a verse. We have the king of Moab, Balak, who is intimidated by the Jews and the success that they've been having. It's always funny why people have issues with Jews when, for all of our success, we have so much tsaros, right? The Jewish people left Egypt and they had sinned and they were going to remain in the desert. And yet, for some reason, the Jews were irritating this king. So what do? You can't really start up with the Jews, because as it was in the desert, every time somebody started up with them, God came to the defense of the Jews and, knocked out the enemy. So you got to play the Jews at their own game. So he decided to hire a prophet. And there was a prophet, a non-Jewish prophet. His name was Bilam. And the idea was he was going to hire Bilam and ask Bilam to curse the Jews. In other words, he was going to attack the Jews at the spiritual level, hoping that way he'd be able to pull it off. And if you're familiar with the story, I'll tell you the story briefly. So Bilam is a little arrogant, and he tells Balak, knowing that this is going to be a long shot, he says, even if you pay me all the money in the world, wink, wink, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to help you. And he plays this game: send me more important people. Don't send me your lowly officers. Send me the more important people, and the more important people come. And eventually, he attempts to go to curse the Jews, and God has revealed him and told him that that's not going to happen. You're not going to be successful at cursing the Jews. You're going to say only blessings. And Bilam tries to outsmart God, so to speak. Bilam tries to outsmart God. He thinks there are certain hours that God gets angry, and he's going to try to curse the Jews at that time. Anyway, so the Torah tells us that Bilam is escorted. Stanley, there's some copies up here if you'd like. Bilam sets off with his donkey, and an angel steps into the road to block Bilam's path. And the path is very narrow, so the donkey can't really move, and it just stops. It crouches down, and Bilam starts beating the donkey, and the donkey says to him, like, "What are you doing? Why are you not listening?" So the donkey says, "I've been faithful to you all these years. Why are you you think I'm just, there's an angel standing in the road." And suddenly Bilam's eyes open up, and first message is sometimes the animals could see more than we can see, right? Especially when we're not following in God's path. And the angel says to him, "Why are you hitting your donkey? It's not his fault. It's your fault. You're not listening to God. Why you think you're going to outsmart God?" And he says, "Okay, I'll do whatever you tell me to do." Anyway, the end of the story is Bilam goes, and he, instead of cursing the Jewish people, offers some of the greatest blessings to the Jewish people, many of which have become part of our liturgy. One of the most famous is one that we begin the morning prayers with, Matovu Ahalecha Yaakov, how goodly are your tents, Jacob, Mishkanosecha Yisrael, your dwelling places, O Israel. Not only that, but some of the greatest prophecies in the Torah regarding the Messianic era come from Bilam's prophecies. And so goes the story. So if we think about it, and as we've discussed also many times, in the greatest places of darkness is where the greatest light is found. So here Bilam is trying to curse the Jews with these terrible curses, and instead unbelievable blessings come forth. It's worth studying what these blessings are, what really lies at the core of these blessings, what spiritual energies are there. So this discourse is based on one of those blessings, which is Mi Manah Afar Yaakov, who can count the dirt of Jacob, Umispar es Roiva Yisrael, or the number of the Roiva, which I'll explain in a second, of Israel. And then the verse continues, may my soul die like the upright people, and my end be like theirs. So the basic blessing is, as God promised Abraham, that his children would be many like the dust of the sand of the sea and the stars. So too, who can count the dust of Jacob? Right, on a most basic level, there's so many Jewish people, and that always begs the question: really, are there so many? We're quite small, especially these days. We don't have a strong showing in the. But we are like the stars that are forever, like the sand that can't be counted. There are many comparisons. If you look at the Jewish people over time, we're an eternal people, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of messaging contained within it. But we're going to focus on a different dimension of the verse, where it says, Umispar es Rova Yisrael, who can count the Rova. So in Hebrew, who knows how you say 4 in Hebrew? Arba, right? So Rova and Arba are the same word. So Rova can be understood to be 4, like 4 parts, or 4 like a fourth. You turn the page. Roiva yesh by beis pirushim. Roiva has 2 explanations. Pirush echad chelik revius. One explanation is that it's 1/4. V'habeis miloshen arba, and the second is it's an expression of 4. Why is it an expression of 4? That amongst the Jewish people there are 4 main aspects of the Jewish person, as we're going to clarify later on. And as I said, these discourses, the opening is kind of a jumping point for us to get into some other topics, and we don't wait long. We jump into that right away. V'inyan. To explain this, we're going to explore the following. It's written in Yeshayahu, in Isaiah. Everything that is called by my name and exists for my glory, God says, I have created it, I have formed it, and also made it. Okay, so let's look very carefully at what it says here. God says, I have created it, I have formed it, and have also made it. So we have created, formed, and made. These three stages, created, formed, and made, correspond, they correspond to three levels, three aspects, which are thought, speech, and action. Just take a moment to talk about thought, speech, and action. We discussed this early on in the World of Kabbalah course, that the soul in its physical reality cannot relate to the outside world. It's a spiritual entity. So what is the tools through which the soul relates to the outside world? They are thought, speech, and action. Those are called garments. Garments of the soul are thought, speech, and action. The soul uses the thought of the body to think, the speech of the body to speak, and the organs and limbs of the body to engage in action. Thought, speech, and action. And these three expressions, or three garments, thought, speech, and action, correspond to the three ideas of created it, formed it, and made it. How so? Barasiv hu bechinas machshava. Created it is thought. Why is it thought? Shuhu yesh me'ayin. Because thought is yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo, something from nothing, right? Before you have a thought, it doesn't exist. It's nowhere. Now, it is brought down in Kabbalistic teachings that all thoughts originate within the soul, but at least in a conscious way, which one could essentially make the argument about all of existence, that it ultimately lived prior to its coming into being in God's essence. But as it gets manifest as an independent, as something substantive, that is creation. Something from nothing. It wasn't here before. It now has come into being. The thoughts that we have didn't exist before we thought them. Right? They didn't exist anywhere. Once we thought them, now they've come into being. Okay? Now what do you do with that thought? So now you have Yitzartiv. I have formed it. Ubechinas hadibor. That is speech. Shubechinas tsura shemitzayer ha'oisis shebemachshava. The forming forms the letters of thought. So on a very simple level, when you think of an idea, in the moment that you're thinking it, you're not actually, when you're thinking the actual thought, there are letters there, but you're not in touch with the letters until you do some meta-thinking, meta-cognition, I think it's called. When you think about the fact that you're thinking. When you think about the fact that you're thinking, then you start realizing that there's a certain format to the letters that are creating that are holding a particular thought. Let alone when you express it in actual speech. But speech has many manifestations. Speech has manifestation in our thinking as well. Because what is speech? Speech is letters. Speech is communication. It's revelation, as we're going to elaborate on in a little bit. So even in our thinking, we have letters that contain a particular thought. When we speak a thought, we can choose to speak a thought in these words or speak a thought in those words, right? You hear a professor teaches a class, and the students then go and repeat it. They're going to repeat it in different words. They're not going to all repeat it in the exact same words. Why? Because each person has taken the information, they've processed it, and are using their own choice of words, but they're all conveying the same idea. So even in our thinking, right, we are choosing to use certain letters and certain permutations of letters to think a particular thought. The whole analogy of creation and formation and so on, we have the Midrash, which uses the idea of like clay, right? You have a clay mass. So God creates the mass, and then the mass then becomes formed in different fashions. It could be formed into a tree, it can be formed into a person, it can be formed into an atom, it could be formed into whatever else might be formed. So a thought is just the mass of an idea, and then it gets texture through forming the thought with a particular set of letters. Okay, I'm not going to belabor the point. We get that, right? Okay. Afasisiv, the verse concludes, I have also made it. What does it mean that I have made it? I have made it is that now that thought, which I formulated in letters, now has moved into the realm of action. So again, there could be a lot of layers to what we mean by action. So we can think a thought, we can formulate it into letters in our brain, and then we can articulate it. The articulation of an idea is also a form of action, right? So that could be a self-contained process, thinking, forming the thoughts into letters, and then speaking them as the form of action. But if we want to zoom out a little bit and be a little bit more inclusive, we could also think of a concept of you want to undertake a particular endeavor. So you need to think about the endeavor before you just go and do it. By the way, sometimes these things happen so quickly that we're not even conscious of it. The body just goes through those motions. But let's say I want to make a cup of coffee, right? So my thought says, okay, what you got to do ultimately is take a cup and take the coffee and the hot water and, do such and such. So the thought is somewhat abstract. Then I begin to articulate it in some form of speech. And again, that could be in a very quick manner within my thinking. I'm going to do these steps. And then I actually do the action. Okay, so the action, the end result, the action of making the coffee has a permutation that lives in some conjugation or permutation of letters. And then it exists even higher than that in its more abstract space of thought. And by the way, you can think about making a cup of coffee and never make a cup of coffee, right? It could just be a thought. And you can think about making a cup of coffee and you can think about making 10 different types of coffees. I was actually thinking whether I should use the Keurig or the instant. It's like, which type of coffee are you going to make? And then you actually execute a particular action. So this is the process. Thought, speech, and action is the flow through which things evolve. Yes?
I guess thought about it, which would be the real, I'm not sure how to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And, he said it and he actually made it. So it seems like the creation is first because it's fully created as a thought in your mind. It's fully created and it's already together. So you just, including that speech and including that action, it's just you kind of bringing it here.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. And if we think about the function of all of the 10 sephiros, like when we learned it in the course, right? You work your way up. It's all we're doing is we're in the process of devolution, right? In the process, all we're doing is moving into a space that's more abstract, but the same properties are there, right? Nothing new happens. It just becomes more tangible, becomes more manifest, which is why in all of existence, you have the core building blocks of creation. We have the microcosm of the body, the person, and how we function, because we look at the microcosm and then we are a mirror for all of existence. But all we are is the same devolution of everything else. A tree works the same way, right? You plant a seed, the seed disintegrates, it begins to produce, it goes through its own evolving process until it produces the end result, which is fruit. And everything works that way, everything in the spiritual realms and so on and so forth. So there's this process that repeats itself everywhere. And if you dig deep enough, you'll find it in everything. Okay, now if we look carefully at the verse, you want to flip back to page 4. The verse says, everything that is called by my name and exists for my glory, I have created it, formed it, and also made it. Now, in Hebrew, and especially when we talk about biblical texts, everything is very particular. There's no extra word. So the verse could have said, I have created it, formed it, and made it. It says, and also made it. So in unpacking scripture, when something says and also, it's adding something that's not explicit. So we have formed, created, formed, made it, and there's something else. There's the also. What is the also? So he continues. Ksiv b'lashon af. So I'm sorry, I jumped the gun first. First, just the action has this kind of separation. I have created it, formed it, and also made it. So there's a separation between created and formed and made. And then we're going to also add an additional component in a minute. Ksiv b'lashon af, action is expressed through saying also. Why? Because vis-a-vis created and formed it, or vis-a-vis thought and speech, action is something altogether separate. Speech and thought are much more intimately connected because it is the thought that formulates the particular letters of speech. In simple English or in simple Hebrew, that which you think is what you speak. Whereas when it comes to action, there is not necessarily a direct link between one's action and what the person is thinking, right? Sometimes people do things and we want to know, what were you thinking? Like, what were you thinking when you did that? It's not so obvious, right? When a person speaks, we know what they're thinking. We may still ask them, what were you speaking? Like, we have this joke in our house, there are think it thoughts, right? They shouldn't come out of your mouth. They should stay in your head. Just keep those thoughts there. But why is that? Because when a person speaks, you can't say, it's very hard to, once you say something, it's hard to retract it and say, I wasn't really thinking what I said. Then why did you say it? Right? If you said something, you're obviously thinking it. But actions are much more open to interpretation because they're separate. They're removed from us. So there is a clear distinction between thought and speech and action. So that's the first reason in the verse it creates this separation. So these are three levels, right? We said that the verse, we're talking about 4 levels in the verse, right? Who can count the dust of Jacob and count the 4 of Israel? So far we have 3, thought, speech, and action. But there's a 4th. There is a 4th level, which is higher than the aforementioned 3 levels, machshava, dibur, u'maisa, of thought, speech, and action. V'nirmaz b'milas af, and that is hinted to, that is alluded to in the word af also. Ki afu lashon riboy, because the word af comes to add. It's coming to add something that's not mentioned explicitly. And that we're talking about another level, a 4th level that's higher than the 3 levels, and it's much loftier than they are. Now, what is that? So it's going to take us a little while to get there, but hang tight. Any questions thus far? Any comments?
Fascinating. And it makes sense why, there are certain populations who would be threatened by the success because, the Jewish people as a collective have made it look so easy, but it's because these principles are being applied. So when that fear does come in, it's like, all I have to do is just bring it down into reality. You're actually thinking of these principles consciously and saying to yourself collectively, all we got to do is bring it down into reality. So it makes so much sense.
Good. Thank you.
This maybe technically is also hitting, not only hitting that there's a 4th, but is there a clue to the 4th in that word off? Or did I miss that? Read too much into it?
Not necessarily.
So hint to what this fourth is going to be?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
not necessarily. Yeah. It's just the principle that it's adding something.
So how do we go from Bravo all of a sudden to these four aspects?
So Rova, it means four. So the remember the context. Bilam is praising the Jewish people. He's praising them about these qualities. That's somebody trying to get in for the class? I got it. I got it here. I got the magic thing here. So Bilam is praising the Jewish people. And in praising the Jewish people, he's saying, who can count the dust of Jacob and count the four of Israel? So what we're trying to do is understand, what are we talking about? What is this four that the Jewish people are praised for? So it's going to take us a little while to get to that information. This is your ongoing question. No, this is Payman's ongoing question. How do we know? So I'm going to give you the same answer I've always given you. There are traditions that are passed down, and I think I told you the idea that when an appropriate for the context here, as I mentioned, the Rebbe's 30th yahrzeit. The Rebbe was a holy man, and people would come by the Rebbe on Sunday for dollars, or throughout the years of the Rebbe's leadership, and ask for a blessing for a particular situation. And the Rebbe would tell them, start keeping Shabbos, start keeping kosher, put a mezuzah on your door, check your tefillin, whatever it was. How did the Rebbe know? How did the Rebbe know? So it's the same question. How does the Alter Rebbe know that this is what it's talking about? How did Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, know that? The answer is that we live in a certain dimension. So in the dimension that we live, all we see is what we get. When you have a different, you go to the eye doctor, they say, is this one better? Is that one better? When you change the frequency, you suddenly look at existence through a totally different set of eyes. You're not looking at something else. You're looking at the same thing. You're just looking at it a different dimension. So when you read a verse, when you and I read the verse, who can count the dust of Jacob? We see one thing. A Rebbe, a tzaddik, a holy person sees a different dimension. And for them, it's as obvious as to you is obvious the literal meaning. Now, it's not really that novel what I just said. The thing is that we still are only looking at it until intellectually. So there's only two ways we can get there. Either intellectually, which we're doing here, we're trying to study what the Alter Rebbe saw, and then when we finish reading what the Alter Rebbe saw, we will suddenly say, "Oh wow, okay, I see that now. I see it in the verse now." Or you experience it. You actually experience the energy of what's being taught. I was listening to a song this morning. My iTunes playlist that just pulling a song, and it's a really beautiful song. And I was thinking about it. The song is an opening passage that is frequent throughout the Talmud, and the opening passage is, "Our sages have studied, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis have studied," and that's the whole song. It's really the whole song. There's nothing more to it. And they sing it over and over again, and it's a conversation between a father saying to his son, "Come, let's study Tanu Rabbanan." And I was thinking to myself, it's like, what is this song really all about? It's not about the actual subject matter. It's about accessing a different world that we don't consciously spend our time in, right? To delve into a different dimension. Right? Look at the world around us. People are so lost. People are trying to find connection, and it's hard because we live surface. But if we begin to dig deeper, we get to experience a different dimension. And that's, in part throughout the ages, Jews have studied Torah because I don't want to say it's an escape, but it's actually an energizer. We for a moment we get to say, this whole world that we're looking at, that seems that what you see is what you get. There's something altogether going on beneath the surface, right? So it's a long answer to your short question, but that's the explanation. I know it's good. It's a It's good. It's a very fair question, and don't stop asking it. And I'll keep giving you the same answer. When I stop giving you the same answer, you know something's off. Okay. So what is this fourth level that we're talking about? So we're gonna dig in. This is very powerful and beautiful stuff we're going to be studying here. The explanation is as follows. First, we have to understand. Remember, you got to try to keep the chain of the stream of consciousness here. We have to understand Tachlis Yeridas Hanashamas La'ilam Hazeh, Sheyiridasan Seirach Aliyah Hikanoida. Why are we here? That's the question. What are we doing here? What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? But a little deeper is why, when we say I means my soul, right? The I is my soul. Why did I come here? I'm not really asking why my body arrived here. My body arrived here, it was a technical circumstance how my body arrived here. But the I, the me that's not you, and what distinguishes me from you is not necessarily the body in and of itself. I mean, that does distinguish us from each other, but it's the fact that I have a unique purpose here, different than your unique purpose. So why am I here? Why did my soul come down to this earth? What was its purpose? So there's a general, well-known answer that's brought down in all the teachings of Jewish thought, that every descent is for the sake of an ascent. In other words, spirituality, godliness, doesn't lower itself unless there's an upside. So if God is going to cause the soul to come all the way down into a body, there must be an upside to it, right? So in other faiths, the upside is that when a person finishes their time on this earth, they go to a better place. There's such a notion. Now, in Judaism, that is an incorrect notion for a couple of reasons. Number one, the most basic reason is the Garden of Eden is also a creation of God, and godliness, especially, again, we're going to refer to that course. That's why it was so important. If you didn't participate in the course, follow it online. The greatest expression of God's essence is found in this physical reality. So anything that happens in the spiritual realms is wonderful, but it doesn't come close to one moment on this earth. As we say in the Mishnah, that greater is one moment of good deeds on this earth than all of the world to come. It's a light show there, a lot of revelation, but it's not essence. This is where the real deal is at. So number one, it's not a better place. It's a more illuminated place, but it doesn't make it better just because it's illuminated. It's a big light show. It's great. It's a lot of fun, but it's not the real deal. The real deal is here. You can't give charity in heaven. You can't keep Shabbat in heaven. You can't do a good deed to another person in heaven. All you do is you be. That's all you do in heaven is you be. You experience divine revelation. But the only place you can make a difference, by the way, even angels can't. It's only us human beings in this physical reality that are able to make a difference in this world, to do something. But the question is an even deeper question, which is captured in the next paragraph. What is this ascent all about? Where were our souls before they came into our body? They were basking in divine glory. They were hanging out with God. Right? That's where they were. They weren't anywhere else. They weren't in the Bahamas. Our souls, before they came into our bodies, were hanging out with God. So what happened? God took these souls that were hanging out, enjoying the presence of God. He schlepped it away from there, sent it through all the worlds, and stuck it in a body. Okay, see, there's a purpose here. We're going to be in this body. We're going to navigate the challenges of this physical reality. And then when our time is up, we go back. We'll go back to where? To the Garden of Eden to bask again in God's glory? So what's the upside in that? We started basking in God's glory, and we came back to the place to bask in God's glory. If our souls started at some lower level, And then we spent time on this earth and then came back and went to a place that was higher. Okay, it would make sense. But we were in the highest place in the get-go. We were in the ultimate place that one could possibly be. And now we came down here and we're going back to the same place. What's the upside? Where's the ascent that makes the descent justified? This is the question. An additional question, related but not directly related. So when the example that we spoke about, thought, speech, and action, we gave that example of the human condition, the human experience, right? We're using the person as a microcosm to understand, to mirror the spiritual realms. So that makes sense on a human level. But what kind of thoughts does God have? How are we drawing? Remember, this really to your question, Peyman, the verse is not talking about us. It's talking about God. Not Bilam's verse, but the verse from Yeshaya, from Isaiah, that I created everything created for my glory, created, formed, and made for my glory. If we're drawing the parallel of thought, speech, and action there, where's God's thought? As the prophet says, Isaiah says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Or elsewhere it says, that God has no bodily form. So what kind of thought is it? What is this thing that we say when we talk about God's thought? Right? We're trying to understand a very abstract idea, which on a human level, we get it. But how do we mirror that? Like, what are we talking about when we talk about God having thoughts? God doesn't have thoughts like we understand them. God doesn't have a body. So what is the divine thought that we're talking about here? So just to kind of recap where we're up to, just to keep the stream of consciousness. We opened up the discourse with the verse from the Torah portion, Balak, where Bilam is making the statement, who can count the dust of Jacob and count the Rova of Israel. We explained that Rova is both the number 4 or a fourth. What is the 4? The 4 parallels the idea that's referenced in the verse in Isaiah, that God says that I create everything for my glory, I created, I formed, and I also made it. And we said that those 3 refer to thought, speech, and action. And the also adds a 4th layer, which we're going to try to figure out what that is. In order to understand that, we have to understand, why do souls come down to this earth in the first place? When ultimately they're going back to the same place they came from. So what's the upside? And we asked another question, that what does it mean, thought, when we refer to God? What does thought mean? What is thoughts as it relates to the divine that's beyond? God's thoughts are not our thoughts. He doesn't have a body. So what does that really mean? That's where we're up to. So far, so good. We're keeping the stream of consciousness here. All right. The matter is as follows. In general, when we have revelation, something is hidden and now it becomes revealed. Specifically, when we're talking about in the supernal worlds, in the divine worlds, when something is hidden, becomes revealed, we call that the word of God, right? It's a nice throwaway line. The word of God. What is the word of God? What does it literally mean, the word of God? A prophet comes along and says, I got the word of God for you. Meaning that there was something, if we take the prophet, right? We're believing the prophet. The prophet is communicating something that God had concealed. There was something concealed in the divine, and God is revealing it to us. So and we're calling that speech, the word of God. Why? By way of analogy with a person. What is speech? Hadibur, humagala luzulase matspune machshavte. When a person speaks, they are revealing that which is hidden in their thoughts. So too, by way of analogy, with 10 utterances, 10 statements, God created the world. What does it mean with 10 utterances, God created the world? It means that whatever power was concealed in the divine in creating the world, it became revealed. That's what happened. It's Candace, right? To Candace's point, right? It was hidden, so to speak, in God's thought, and then God wanted to reveal it. So he uttered these things that brought it into a consciousness. A very simple, straightforward idea. In this physical reality, it becomes manifest as physical. In the greater physical cosmos, the galaxies and so on, it's revealed as galaxies. And in the spiritual realms, it's revealed as created spiritual beings. But all it is a concealment of that which was hidden that became revealed. Now, specifically, we're talking about this idea of 10 utterances. We'll deviate for a minute to explain what this is. Very appropriate during these days. We're studying this section in the daily study of Tanya, where the same author, the Alter Rebbe, is talking about these principles, and it says that everything in this physical reality gets its life force from the words that God uttered in the creation story. And if you look in the creation story, there are 10 utterances. There are 10 times. There's actually 9 times where it says, "And God said, let there be light, let there be a firmament," and so on. And then our sages say that the opening passage of the Torah, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, is also one of the utterances. So we have 10 utterances. But if you look at the 10 utterances, you're not going to find that much. You have a sky, you have galaxies. Oh, you actually have galaxies. You have a sun and a moon. It doesn't even say that. It just says, "Let there be light." It doesn't say, "Let there be a sun and a moon." The verse talks about the grass and vegetation. There's only so many things that are uttered there. So why do we say that everything derives its energy from there? So the Baal Shem Tov, based on a verse, it says, "La'olam Hashem dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim." Forever, God, your word stands in heaven. So the words that God uttered to create the world, those letters go through varying permutations. So in the Hebrew alphabet, and we know that it's the Hebrew letters that are the channel through which the life force is transmitted. The Hebrew alphabet is a very, very magical alphabet. First of all, each letter has meaning as a letter unto itself, right? Like in English, the letter A also defines a noun, right? A. So in Hebrew, every letter of the alphabet has a meaning in and of itself. Then there are varying different ways that letters are interchangeable. So I'll just give you a few examples. You have the first letter and the last letter of the alphabet can be interchanged. The second letter and the second to last letter could be interchanged. It's a process known as atbash. The aleph replaces the taf, or the taf replaces the aleph. The beis replaces the shin, or the shin replaces the bet, and so on. We also have the idea of gematria, where each letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a numeric value. And words that have the same numeric value have the capacity to be interchangeable. We also have 5 ways through how letters are expressed. There are guttural letters, there are letters that are expressed with the palate, the teeth, the lips, and the tongue. So all letters that belong to a particular method of expression are interchangeable within themselves. So these are just some examples. So the idea is that the 10 utterances that God uttered at creation, as they descend through the spiritual realms, they take on new permutations, but they're the same words, the same letters. And in that process, they bring into being the various different things, all of existence. And those permutations of those utterances become the channel through which those physical things and the spiritual things continue to derive their spiritual energy, their actual life force from. So all of this is to tell us that what is speech? When we say the word of God, speech is merely revealing that which was hidden. We see this in a grand way, in a grand manner, in these 10 utterances, right? That God uttered 10 things, but in that process brought everything into being. What does that mean? That everything, all of existence, is a revelation of that which was concealed within God's essence. Again, not an overly complicated concept. When I take a piece of wood and I shape it into a table, the potential to create that table was inside of me. So when you look at the table, it's a revelation or a piece of art that I draw, right? It's a revelation of that which was hidden within me before it became manifest. You might say, I'm expressing myself, right? Look at the artists, they express themselves in this art, in this painting, in this song, in this, whatever it is, in this poem, they're expressing themselves. Now, in God's case, it's even more so because the very thing that's being expressed, as well as the expression, are all coming into being in that very same revelation. But at the end of the day, all it is a revelation of that which was prior concealed. Does this make sense?
Is that carried forward in meaning the utterances establish physical reality at the moment we did it. But I think you're implying that even in today's reality, every aspect of it can be traced back to and so history is contained in those.
Yeah, the creative process wasn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing event. As we say in the prayers every day, he renews in his goodness every day constantly the works of creation. So, which means that the creation is in a sense brand new this moment, which is very liberating for us to recognize that whatever happened yesterday is non-existent, because the world we live in today is a brand new world and ought to empower us to live today fully. On the other hand, it's all interconnected all the way to the beginning of time. Nothing is in a vacuum. And therefore, every moment in history, every moment in time is wondrously connected to all of existence, which is also very reassuring that we're not living in a vacuum. Nothing is random. It's all ultimately interconnected.
But with a special role to play with 10 others as time goes on.
Yeah.
The recreation every day, every moment, still is by virtue of those 10.
Yeah. I gave this talk a few weeks ago. I thought it was pretty smart, if I may say so myself. Sometimes we wake up in the morning and we're not feeling very motivated. Happens. Everybody wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. And if you start thinking about like what's going on inside of me that is not motivating me. So have this conversation with God, right? God says, hey, good morning. It's time to get out of bed. And you say, thanks, God, but I really messed up yesterday. God says, I know you messed up, and I gave you back your soul today. I recreated you just now. Say, okay, I can't try that one. I don't have a lot of confidence in how it's going to play out today. God says, I know. I gave you back your soul. I recreated you today. And I messed up. I don't have the talents. I'm not good enough. Somebody's angry at me. Whatever excuse you're going to make, right? For not, whatever self-talk you have to not schlep yourself out of bed and to face the day falls short, because God just recreated everything and just recreated you. And he's basically saying, I know all of that, and I chose to give you new life today again. So you're important. And I know all that stuff that happened. And despite that, or maybe because of that, or however it's intertwined, You're here again. So if that's true for me within my own life, vis-a-vis my short life, surely that's true in the context of all of history, right? Today is not just a random day. It's part of a continuum that started all the way back at Bereshit's bara, in the beginning God created. So
Keep doing it until something.
yeah. Yeah, we'll keep doing it until whatever is supposed to happen will happen. But we have to face each day and each challenge in the world and see ourselves. We're never going to know why, right? So that's a fruitless question to ask, but we can always ask what, like why all that happened, or why God chose. Why did you choose to bring me back here? I have no idea, but what I'm supposed to do with that, I do know. There's actions that I can take. There's productive things that I can do to make the world a better place. That's something we can do every single day.
Taking this too literally, but you hit upon it now, and you mentioned it back in the beginning of putting souls into bodies to accomplish things here on earth. And I've been thinking about everyone being different, and you take mentally disabled, okay? I know maybe God didn't intend that to happen. That's probably where man messed up, engaging in substance abuse, I imagine, and throughout the generations or whatever, you get somebody who's mentally disabled. So maybe that wasn't intended by him. It was done by us. But for a soul to be put into a mentally disabled body, it's going to be very limited on what it can accomplish, as opposed to, you're putting it to all these bodies, and it's only going to accomplish so much depending on someone who's severely mentally disabled. So help me understand that.
So you're asking the why question.
In other words, we weren't supposed to be that way. We messed up as far as that is concerned.
So if your question is whether I believe or whether Torah believes that man can perpetuate those kind of results, I'm going to tell you categorically that the Torah does not believe that. That is part of the divine design. In other words, which then opens up the theological question: do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to good people, and so on and so forth? But in and of itself, no, man can definitely do all kinds of things, but the results are all ultimately in God's hands, right? And we know this, by the way, in our own lives, because there are people who are very, very smart and endeavor to build very successful businesses and fail miserably. And it's not because they're not smart. It's not because they didn't have a good plan. It's just things didn't line up. I'll tell you something interesting. I started a tech company years ago. It was actually a really good idea. The timing was wrong, and there was actually, over the time that the company existed, I think there was over $1.5 million of investment in it. I didn't run the company; my brother-in-law did. And about a year and a half after the company shut down, multiple companies came to the market and have been wildly successful. I'll tell you what it was. It was an online giving platform. When did Obama run for president? That was his first term, was beginning
2012.
So when he was running for his first term, I got the idea, because they say he raised, at least at the time, he raised the most of any presidential candidate, and most of it came from small donations, like dollar donations. People sent it in the mail to him. And I said, wait, that's our idea. The Rebbe taught us always give every day a little bit to tzedakah. So I said, we need to have an online platform for this. So my brother-in-law took the idea, and we built an application, and it was a whole fascinating story. It actually made a little bit of money for a while. We had Salvation Army used our product. I mean, it was on a good track. It just, for a variety of reasons, didn't go anywhere. And after we closed it down, about a year and a half after it closed down, GoFundMe opened up. and all these other online platforms. So he's a smart guy, I'm a smart guy, and we can use all the rational reasons why it didn't work, but it doesn't make a difference because the next guy wasn't that smart and was successful. There was actually a book written interviewing a lot of these bazillionaires who've made money in the tech world, and asked them what their secret of success is. So, everybody likes to tell the story after, oh, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I exercise and I meditate for an hour and I read. All of them at the end of the day said timing. Their greatest secret to success was timing, which they're not in control of. They just came to the market at the right time. The market needed it and it responded to it, and they made all this money. So the point being, and by the way, we see this in every layer of life. You can do your best job trying to be a good parent and studying and reading all the best parenting stuff, and then your kid ends up going down a really bad path and has nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. And then you have parents who are terrible parents. They're awful, deadbeat parents. And somehow their children turn out to be these glorious human beings, right? So, and then you have people who will exercise and take care of their health and they drop dead randomly. And it's not even, and when they do an autopsy, they can't even really tell. It's not like this person had a congenital heart condition that they just messed up because they were running a marathon. So that's not to say that we're not supposed to do all those things. We're supposed to put our best foot forward and so on and so forth. But success is not in our hands. To your example before of the script being written, there's a script that's written. We get to choose where we're going to place ourselves in the scene. So, but that opens up another question, which is why? Why does God allow for these things to happen? And that's a question. I always like to say that question is both on a micro and macro level. We have a harder time. Different people have more difficulty in the macro, and some people have a different in the micro. In other words, we always ask the big question about the Holocaust, but you don't need the Holocaust to ask the question. It happens every single day where people are killed unnecessarily and in terrible ways, and one can ask why and so on. So, to my point before, we're not going to get the answer to why, but we can get the answer to what. What am I supposed to do with it? How am I supposed to process this? And to the specific question about children who are born with severely handicapped, mentally or physically handicapped, that they're never going to, be productive, so to speak, in society. So, there's a lot of the classic ideas that this child came into the world to teach compassion to the people that are in their world. They can teach compassion. There was one young man who I think maybe it was autistic or severely autistic, and came by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told the parents to put a tzedakah box in that child's room in the home that they were staying at. And the Rebbe said that they have a higher spiritual connection. They're more in tune because they have less filters, so they're able to see more clearly. So these are situations where we can learn from it. We can learn from these people and try to better ourselves and better the world as a result. But we're not going to get everything figured out. That's the existential question of why, and it's a theological question, which will always leave us wanting because we don't have the essence. We're just trying to peer into the essence.
The soul is not genetical. I'm picturing like everybody that's born as a baby, the soul's coming down, being placed in that body. And then you said, the person takes it from there, what they're going to accomplish here on earth. Parents said that's not genetical, it's not passed on. It's
direct.
It's the body at birth.
Correct.
So, deciding, who's deciding, well, this soul's going into a mentally disabled person as into someone who's going to be a genius. Is it the soul determining?
No,
what that person
it's God determining that. It's God determining that. And sometimes a soul comes here not for itself, but to serve others. So, excuse me. So in the soul coming down to serve others, the same question applies, right? There must be an upside even more so for such a soul, right? For a soul that comes down to make a difference. So we need to know why you're tormenting the soul to come down into a body and have to navigate all the challenges. There better be an upside. But if you're taking a soul who's not even coming for itself, it's coming there to serve others, that question remains a very strong question. What's the upside? And we'll get there. But thank you. Thank you for that discussion. Go ahead. I see what you talk about over dinner.
You don't want
What else bothers me, and I know this is basically the same thing, but I think it down. You know, I used to be such expenditure. Blah, blah, blah. It's a terrible story. Like if somebody, let's just say, I'm just using for an example, in India, it's here too. You know, you hear about these poor women that can't escape. And they are being prostitutes, and then their children are, it just makes me cry to talk about it. They can't get out for the most part. I just don't understand.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm sitting right next to you. I don't understand it either.
That's
Keep questioning. What I'll tell you is an anecdote. So Eli Wiesel, after the Holocaust, decided he came from a Hasidic background. There's actually a beautiful transcript of a conversation he had with the Rebbe, really beautiful. Anyway, so he had a private audience with the Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe said he was a single man, and the Rebbe said to him, you know, you should think about marriage. He says, I don't want to bring children into this world. So the Rebbe said, why not? He said, because I can't bring children into this world, and I question the whole existence of God. How could there be a God after all that's happened? So the Rebbe, you know, validated his experience, and then the Rebbe said to him that how could you not believe in God? In other words, there's two ways to look at these terrible circumstances. One is to discount the presence of God. And what we're trying to do is I don't mean to be flippant, but we're trying to create God in our image. In other words, I'm uncomfortable with what I see. I can't make sense of it. So therefore, I need to figure out how I can get God to fit into my discomfort. And there are those theologians who will draw the conclusion that God chooses to step away from the world. He creates the world and then removes himself. I don't want to believe in a God who removes himself, creates a world, and then goes on his beach chair and says, I'm going to watch the show. It's not such a pleasant show. I mean, there's a lot of pleasant things to watch in the show, but there's a lot of ugliness. And I don't want to believe in a God who just allows for that stuff to happen. So what's the alternative? The alternative is that God is very present and that I don't understand God. Now, that's also uncomfortable, right? Because I got to be uncomfortable. And I don't like being uncomfortable. But that is the discomfort of faith, right? And I'm not going to resolve it, but I'm also not going to pretend that I, a finite human being, have capacity to comprehend an infinite God. I will cry about the suffering. I will pray about the suffering. It's why we believe in a messianic era where, first of all, suffering will end and that we will understand the meaning behind the suffering. As the prophet says, we will thank God for the affliction, which is beyond our comprehension, how we could possibly come to a place where we can do that. But that's what will happen in the messianic era. And until then, we're going to navigate our discomfort.
I mentioned this back in the previous class. I think it all comes back to we've been given the power to think and reason as opposed to animals. And that's why all of the nastiness, shall we say, on the face of the earth exists, because
we have free choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suppose if we didn't, it would be a garden of Eden, so to speak. And
But we'd be wasting our time here.
Just follow the course
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
end.
100%.
And, because everything, all that evil is going to come from the power we have. free thought. like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Yep,
So we're responsible.
absolutely. We're responsible. We have to step up. However you look at the linkage, by all accounts, God put us here to do something, not just to sit back and say, well, it's out of my control, right? Even as we believe that God is active in what's going on, God also put us here. And that's why the question, what are we doing about it, is the question that we have to ask ourselves every single day. Because we do have something to contribute to the world. And we have to try to alleviate the suffering of others. We have to try to bring more light into the world. That's without a doubt our calling.
So that's why we're given the power to think and reason to contribute. We're just using it the wrong way.
Yeah, at times.
If we use that in the right way, then it
Sure,
would be
sure.
beautiful.
The tree of knowledge, good and evil. We have that power. Yeah. All right, fantastic. We'll be back here next week.